Hi guys, so in today's video, basically I'm at the airport and honestly this is just like a trial run for me before I fly off next Monday. So today's video I wanted to share like some tips and tricks about the high potential individual visa. So the previous video was a bit more like detailed process, and I think this time around like these tips would be more useful if you kind of like already know the whole process and you still think about it and you just want to have like a bit more information. So I hope to share some useful tips that maybe like would be important in your decision making process, or if you have already decided to actually apply for the visa, then these tips will definitely like help you out while you are preparing for your move. So I think the way I would do this is that I would just probably like walk around and I will record myself. And today I have 10 tips for you, 2 bonus advice tips at the end as well. So stay tuned, and I'll also add in like the timestamps and just like a whole summary of what my tips are. Okay, so tip number one will be to account for additional costs beyond the visa cost, which I've shared previously. So that will be somewhere between like 4 to 6K. So 6K including the financial proof that you need to show, and of course this 6K is also inclusive of some costs that we need to bear, but not everything. So additional costs that you might want to consider is your one-way flight ticket. Next would be temporary accoms for about 1 to 2 weeks while you look for your permanent accommodation. Also setting aside enough money for your rental. So for that, looking at paying your rent as well as tenancy deposit, holding deposit, etc. So beyond that, you also want to set aside some day-to-day expenses for 1 to 2 months, because you might not be sure exactly when your pay will come in. When are you joining your job, and when will they actually like credit you your paycheck essentially. So you don't want to be kind of like waiting anxiously for that paycheck. Next, you also want to just set aside some money. You don't want to be at zero bank balance. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much it in terms of the cost. So I don't exactly have like a figure to give you, but you know I think there are definitely some resources out there that you can like look and get an idea of like day-to-day expenses. Alright, next it will be to book your tickets way in advance. I think as soon as like you can confirm a date, try to book it as soon as possible, because this flight tickets really tend to hike up quite a bit, especially like depending on which season you are going. So for example, like September is pretty busy with a lot of students who are heading over for their education or exchange, yeah, which is also education. But yeah, you get what I mean. So it's a pretty busy period, and that's why like flight prices tend to hike up significantly. And you don't want to be paying, I don't know, I want to say like you don't want to be paying more than 2K, but I think the reality is that a lot of people end up paying that much because the flight tickets hike up a lot. So I think one thing you want to also consider when you're booking your flight is also the baggage allowance, because after all you're moving there and you will probably be bringing more things than you would on like a regular holiday. So one thing to take note of is like, for example, European airlines, they tend to have a baggage allowance that is much lower, so around like 23 kg, whereas like Middle Eastern airlines like Qatar, Emirates, I believe they have a higher baggage allowance of about 30 kg. So I guess you can also look at it both ways. Like 23 kg will allow you to be a bit more minimalist, and I guess it'll be easier for you when you like move around from place to place. But if you are someone who, I suppose, like you have everything kind of with you and you don't really want to buy anything additional when you're there, then also like take a look at the baggage allowance. But I think it's like with the European airlines, because I think what they tend to do is that they tend to have like additional add-on kind of the extra bag that you can purchase. So you just purchase like an additional bag allowance. That means that you can literally carry like another bag that goes up to like 23 kg. And I think like in maybe like in the other airlines, what they tend to do is that they tend to get you to like pay for your overweight baggage. So yeah, I think the true cost might differ from the airline to airline, and that's definitely something you want to consider since you are like moving for a good amount of time. Right, so beyond the baggage allowance, another thing you also want to consider is the airfare rules. So you want to get a ticket that is refundable and also one that you can change the date. So why I say refundable and you can change the date is because a lot of times, like, even if you get a ticket that allows you to change the date, like let's say if you're unable to actually fly to your postponed or preponed date, for example, maybe there is like no flight tickets available, then like what do you do? So you wouldn't want to put yourself in that position, and therefore I would highly recommend getting like a ticket that you can actually refund and also change the date, unless you're super duper sure that you will fly on that date and you want to fly on that date. Okay, next, it's not exactly a tip, but it's more like a consideration. So the consideration of whether you should apply for the visa first or should you get a job first. So I think like the answer depends, and it's difficult to give a definite answer because it really depends on what situation you're in. So the thing is, like, when you're doing job hunting, as we all know, it's something that is super duper tough. Like, finding a job is one thing, but finding a job you like is also another thing. And in terms of liking it, it has to give you a decent salary, because you wouldn't want to be like working in order to live, you know what I mean? Yeah, you want to have some savings set aside, and for that reason it can get a bit difficult to find an ideal job in that case. Of course, like, the ideal job does not exist, and there's a whole other discussion, but in any case, so I think here's the thing, because like job hunting is something that is like a variable that you can't exactly control. You can't control like how long companies will take to actually respond to you. So I would say definitely, if you're super certain about the fact that you want to move, then once employers start getting back to you about interviews, then maybe that's like a sign for you to get started on the process, but not necessarily get the visa, because the visa timeline is pretty standard. Like, it's just 15 working days. And when I say just, like, 15 working days is probably the lower end of like all the waiting time that you need to endure in this whole process. So that's why I would say get the process started. So meaning, like, get your ECCTIS certification done, and then that's like 30 working days, right? So concurrently you can be doing your interviews and like getting admin stuff sorted out, and then subsequently applying for the visa, which would take another 15 working days. Okay, next, it's not exactly a tip, but it's also rather a consideration or like a question that you might have. So, is it easy to get a job? Of course not. Is it ever easy? That's the question. So this time around, there's like more variables involved, I would say, because you need to get something that you would like. You also need to get something that will pay you decently, and allow you to support the lifestyle that you intend to live in the UK. And for those two reasons, it can get quite difficult to find something that you want. And I would say like a good way to kind of like, not say get around, but something that might help you, is to already have in mind like what is your minimum salary that you're kind of willing to like settle for, in a sense. Like, what's your minimum salary that you're asking for? Go and calculate based on like what you think your lifestyle will be like, and based on that you will already be able to kind of eliminate those jobs that are not able to pay you that well. Of course, yes, you can negotiate your pay and all that jazz, but let's be real, like, usually you can't negotiate it that far anyway. So I think like already eliminating those that will not be able to pay you the amount that you desire would really help you make this process a lot more, I guess, bearable, and make your efforts worthwhile in that sense. So yeah, I guess the thing is to also have like patience, and also another thing is not to settle, because like the worst thing you want is that you're moving and you're uprooting your whole life in a country that I guess you're somewhat comfortable with, and you're moving somewhere entirely new and you don't even like the job that you're going to be working in. You're already kind of like in a headspace where you're trying to get used to everything, and here you are like not really loving a job that is most likely going to be like a 9 to 5 kind of job. So yeah, very important, don't ever settle for things even though it might seem very tempting. Your future you will really thank you for that. Okay, tip number 5 would be to calculate your take-home salary. So this can be done by just doing a simple Google search and just typing in like what's my salary after tax deduction, in London, for example. And I believe the very first Google search you will have would already very nicely break down your take-home salary in terms of like per year and also in terms of per month. So the thing is, like, taxes in London are crazy expensive. So don't think like whatever they state to be your salary, that's what you're going to be getting, divide by 12. It's not. So what the amount you'll be getting is like, they minus off the tax, and then after you divide by 12, which is, I think easily it will be like 1k pounds less than what you calculate before you minus off the tax, basically. So with that in mind, like, after you have calculated off your tax, after you calculated off your take home salary, you'll be able to kind of get an estimate of, okay, should I even like try to negotiate, should I even apply for the job and whatnot. Yeah, and I think that will really help you, as I said earlier, like focus your efforts on something that's a bit more worthwhile. Yeah, one more thing is that different companies have different like payroll dates, as with like any country basically. So sometimes like they might pay you at the end of the month, they might pay you in the middle of the month, depends on like what type of company it is. So that's why like you need to have at least like 1 to 2 months like worth of day-to-day expenses at hand when you're moving, so that you kind of like ease your worries and you're not anxiously waiting for the payroll. And I think like unlike the US, I mean it's kind of the same in Singapore. You get your pay for the whole month in one go, so you get it, like for me, I'm getting it like in the middle of the following month because of like the nature of my company, I believe. So yes. Okay, so tip number 6, or more like things you should know, number 6: you don't need to have a job before moving if you have enough savings, and it also depends on like your intentions for moving. So if you're trying to kind of like get away from this whole notion of like trying to fit yourself in a box, or I don't know, maybe like you have some sort of other intentions for moving, trying to like discover yourself, discover your interests, I think it's perfectly valid and fine for you not to have a job before you move. But with that being said, you need to have like savings, or you need to have some form of like financial support to help you out for at least, I suppose, like 2 to 3 months. Yeah, so I think it's very important for you to set your intentions for moving, and based on that you can kind of like weigh and see, is it the right time for you to move, or should you be looking and securing a job first before moving. Okay, so tip number 7 is that there's no expediting of this whole process. So give yourself minimum 2.5 months. So that 2.5 months means that you do your ECCTIS certification within that 2.5 months. You also get your visa process within that 2.5 months. So unlike the skilled worker visa, where you have like a priority visa line, you also have a super priority visa line, and you can get it processed within 5 or 2 working days respectively. No such service exists for the high potential individual route at the moment, so you can't expedite anything essentially. And therefore it's really crucial for you to have in mind like your timeline, and so that it doesn't cause you unnecessary stress, and you are just able to move without worries. So without any worries, huh? So turns out there's actually an additional step if you have already secured a job before you apply for the visa. So after you get your visa and your employer wants to check for your right to work, what you need to do is that you need to generate this share code. And in order to generate this share code, you would either need to have a UKVI account, or you need to use your biometrics residence card, but that card can only be collected in the UK once I land there. And here's the thing, I don't have the card though, because I'm still in Singapore. And unfortunately, if you applied from Singapore, you would have applied through a visa application center, and therefore you do not have a UKVI account. There is an alternative though. Your employer can send a request through this immigration status check, but that might take up to 3 weeks. So this is just some additional info that you want to take note of. Either that, or you just fly in early to collect your card and generate the code for your employer. Okay, and tip number 8 would be to apply for the ECCTIS certification once you're certain you want to move, you want to apply for the visa, so that you get the 30 working days started, and that kind of gets things running concurrently as you are also settling your job situation. Alright, so tip number 9 would be to think about your list of non-negotiables. So this would be with regards to your salary, your job, and accommodation, as well as like your lifestyle when you move. So moving is a huge step, and finances unfortunately play a huge factor. Like money limits a lot of things. and we don't want it to end up like stressing us out unnecessarily. So it's important that you actually have like a list written down somewhere, if you're not going to remember, that reminds you of like what the rational mind you actually thought of, and what are your true non-negotiables, so that you don't end up settling for something that's less than what you desire, because you'll definitely like be able to find something that meets your criteria a bit more closely compared to like what you're presented with. And when we are in kind of like a situation whereby, I suppose, like the more time you take, of course, like there will be a slightly higher financial burden that can be quite like stressful, and that might wanna make you settle for something less. But it's really important for us to always remember that this is something that we're doing for the long run, and it's not so much of like, oh, I just need something now, I just need something to work with at the very moment. You have to live in that place for, I don't know, maybe like a year, maybe 6 months. You have to be working in that job for probably like a good amount of time. So because of that, don't settle for less, because you're definitely deserving, and you'll be able to find what you want. You just need to give yourself time and be patient with yourself as well. Okay, so tip number 10 would be not to settle your accommodation from the comfort of your home, i.e., like, if you're overseas and you are not physically viewing the flat. Because the thing is that things can get dodgy really fast, and you want to like check out the place in person to make sure that you actually like the area as well as the flat. And most of the time, unfortunately, a lot of like the pictures that we see online, it's probably like a spruced up nice version of the flat or the neighborhood. Usually they just show the flat, they won't really show the neighborhood. So we don't want to like end up in a situation where we signed everything, and then when we go there we realize like, oh, I actually don't really like this place, but I have to kind of like deal with it now because I've signed and like given, I don't know, like 6 months of like deposit or something like that. So we don't want that to happen. Okay, let the future you be thankful that the past you didn't want to like just quickly settle everything. Okay, so even though like people will ask you like, oh, have you settled your accommodation and whatnot, no, do not settle your permanent accommodation from the comfort of your home unless you are able to somewhat like get an idea of like the place. Maybe you have some family or friends who live there who can like help you check out the place, and like reassure you that it's actually fine. And I think of course there are times whereby unfortunately we have to kind of like settle accommodation beforehand. I think that's like an unfortunate situation, but as much as possible try not to put yourself in that situation, where you kind of like lock yourself into a contract before even seeing the place and getting a feel of the place. Next, with regards to neighborhoods, I think another thing is that sometimes you might be tempted to like, okay, stay further so that we like save more on like the flat rent. But sometimes transport adds up, and in London like transport is really expensive. So because of that, you might end up actually like spending even more in a month than if you stayed a bit closer. Yeah, so I think having all these like factors in mind is really important. And lastly, I think for a lot of us, or at least for me, because I live with my family, so obviously I didn't have much of a say in like the neighborhood that I want to stay in. And as a result, I ended up having to travel so far for like literally my secondary school, my JC, like uni life, and even my working life. Everything was in the west, but I stay in the northeast. So right now, like you kind of have the, oh my god, I'm gonna cough. Okay, so right now, oh, it's not COVID anyway. So right now, right, oh my god, I'm getting emotional talking about this. Right now you have the choice to decide where exactly you want to stay, so make it count basically. Right, so finally, my first kind of bonus tip or piece of advice is to set your intentions for your move and be calm and collected, or at least try to. So the truth is like things can get really stressful, and that's perfectly normal. And you might start questioning yourself like, oh, why on earth did I decide to move? I chose to leave, like I was living so well, and I was so like familiar with everything, but I decided to throw myself in like the deep end of the sea. And now I'm kind of like making mistakes here and there, things aren't exactly going my way and whatnot. So I think it's very, very important to ground yourself, and kind of like recall why exactly did you want to move in the first place, because that intention is there and that will not change in that sense. So I think really just like knowing your reason for moving essentially, and also like understanding that it's perfectly normal for things to not really go your way, and hindsight is 2020. Of course, like when you look back, you can kind of figure out the most efficient path to do a certain thing, but that doesn't mean that you have to do the most efficient path. And I feel like that's kind of overrated. Like, we're all about efficiency and whatnot, but life is also about living experiences, and it's really important for us to just like be present and be in tune with our feelings, not ignoring the fact that we're feeling stressed out. And I think really like voicing this out to perhaps your support system will be helpful. Of course, like they might not entirely get your feelings because they are not in the same position, but I think having someone to hear you out is definitely helpful. And I guess like while you're talking to them, you're also kind of like talking to yourself in a sense, and you probably like recall exactly why you chose to move in the first place, and that might end up making you feel calmer about this whole situation. And next, I think it's really important for you to be flexible and not be rigid about what's your game plan in that sense. Of course, you can have everything planned out, and everyone like operates differently. So some of us want like every single detail planned out. Some of us feel a bit better with just some vague skeleton planned out, and others like maybe we are just more like going with the flow and we just want to figure things out as it goes. So yeah, I think like whatever it is, it's really important for you to be flexible and not be rigid, because I feel like the moment you're rigid, you're gonna be setting yourself up for like a lot of disappointment, because things will inevitably not go your way. And firstly, that does not mean you suck. That's just how like the world operates, and it's not personal in that sense. So yeah, like don't be so rigid and be a bit more flexible. So an example is like how I had to cancel my flight. I mean, I got full refund because I chose like a fare that allows me to get a refund. So, things like that, like kind of thinking about being a bit more flexible and figuring things out, that will definitely help you in your entire move. And as you are like trying to figure out how to live in that new city, going back to this idea of like being a bit more flexible with the way you do things, that will definitely help you out loads. Really, I want to say that it's okay to ask for help. Honestly, this is something that I struggle with quite a bit as well, because I think that I'm inconveniencing people by asking for help, and I end up like suffering in pain as a result. It's really sad because there's so many people who are probably like very knowledgeable about whatever aspect that you want to ask for help about, but you don't reach out to them because you think like you're disturbing them and all these reasons. Which, I mean, okay, fine, yes, of course, like they have to set aside some time to help you out, but I guess it's just important to remember that it's up to them, whether or not they want to help you. And if they don't help you, it's fine. And as my friend says, it's nothing personal. If they say no, it's on them. And you try to ask for help, and who knows, maybe you get like redirected to some other person or some other source of information, and you at least know that you tried and not suffer in silence, basically. So it's okay to ask for help, and therefore it's very important for you to also communicate, be with your friends or family. I think just not suffering alone in silence, that's the most important like takeaway you should have from this. And I think that's pretty much it, all I have. So 10 tips and 2 pieces of advice. So if this was useful, which I hope it was, feel free to like, share, subscribe, and also like leave any comments. Again, I don't even know who on earth is going to be watching this, but again, I hope that this video is useful and helpful. So till next time, wishing you all the very best in your application. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'll be more than happy to help you out. Take care. Bye bye.